Hello there everyone. Today's video is just a silly ramble on a topic that occurred to me recently. I have seen a video or two about the topic of translation, where a series was adapted by a foreign country with a group of people objecting to how said show was translated, with the content creator defending the translators and bashing all the naysayers. This typically doesn't sit right with me, because even if a lot of good points are made in these videos, and a large majority of the complaints does indeed come from people who don't understand that a one-to-one translation is usually not possible if the same meaning is supposed to be conveyed to the audience while still sounding natural. Nonetheless, I did find it unfair to treat translators as flawless beings, since I could name many examples of goof-ups, situations where they messed up, or at least made a very questionable decision. However, after a bit of thinking, it occurred to me that all of my examples are from Poland.
Welcome back, my meowing milkmaids!
No I jak tam, moje skibidi sigmy?
Yes, my weird, awkward Middle European country seems to have an issue with adapting foreign TV shows. And in this video, I'd like to go over some very odd choices made by my fellow countrymen. So, let's start off with a simple quickie. The first episode of Pokemon has a scene where Ash receives his Pokédex and Pokéballs. The lines are as simple,
Thank you!
in the Polish version, what the professor says isn't proszę bardzo or nie ma za co, which would be appropriate, but rather
Dziękuję!
Witam wszystkich, which basically means I welcome you all. Kind of like you are all welcome, I guess. Completely misunderstanding what welcome is supposed to mean in this context. A rather straightforward mistake, but very serious, considering that "you're welcome" is a statement that even children in elementary schools get to use frequently while learning the basics of English, so it's rather worrying that someone who does translation professionally would get this wrong. Okay, how about we move on to a show more meant for adults? Futurama! Although it was actually called Przygody Frya w Kosmosie over here. The Adventures of Fry in Space. Why? Why change the title? Yeah, a lot of stuff happens in space, but the fact that the show takes place in the future seems more important the way I see it. However, this wasn't the only change, as in the first episode, and maybe one or two more after, if I'm not wrong, Bender was called Zginacz. The Polish way you would call a device to bend things. A direct translation, which doesn't sound convincing as a name and feels very unnatural. I couldn't track down any episodes to prove it, however, thanks to Bashtan and a few others, I have received confirmation that I wasn't wrong. He was indeed called Zginacz. I'm not crazy! Real big thanks for all the help with the research on this one. Polish Futurama history sure turned out to be a bigger rabbit hole than I expected. Anyway, the translators eventually realized how weird Zginacz sounded, and so, with no explanation at all, the characters on the show suddenly started to call Bender by his original untranslated name. And things stayed this way for the rest of the original 4 seasons of the show. Later, the series made a comeback with 4 movies. In Poland, initially, only the first one got released on DVD. It was translated by a different team than before, who were smart enough to realize that Futurama is the better title. As you can see, Futurama is on the box, and the movie is indeed called Bender's Big Score, or rather, Wielka Wyprawa Bendera. Ah, how wonderful. The audience can finally enjoy the show as intended.
Hasta la vista, Beju. Zginacz, co ty wyprawiasz?
Zginacz? They went back to calling him Zginacz, despite putting Bender in the title?
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
Oh, and in case the clip you just saw weirded you out, let me explain. Poland, as is usual for post-Soviet countries, didn't typically do full dubs of foreign TV shows or movies. Instead, there would be one monotone voiced guy talking over everything, who we'd call a lektor.
Gratuluję. 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 Gratulacje.
And that's how most shows and movies are watched in Poland. At least the ones meant for adults. Kids' shows have a chance of getting a dub, and modern cinema releases often feature an alternative dubbed version too. Times are changing a bit in this regard, with dubs becoming a bit more common on streaming from what I can tell, but the Lecter version is still the way many people prefer to watch things. Futurama actually did receive the full Polish dub, which can be found on Disney+. However, the Lecter version is there as an option as well. But only for seasons 5 and up. The original 4, the Adventures of Fry in Space era, does not feature a Lecter track. In fact, even shady websites that would let you download the episodes in the past seem to be wiped clean. There does not seem to be any place where you could find these original versions of the show in Polish, aside from perhaps a few leftover episode clips on YouTube. These episodes have indeed become lost media. Never mind, the show did receive a physical release, and Bashtan owns a DVD of season 1.
No dawaj, zabij mnie. A przy okazji jestem Zginacz. Ratunku, co się dzieje? Jestem Zginacz, zginam pręty. Tak mnie zaprogramowano. Zginacz to twoje życie i musisz sam podejmować decyzje.
Amazing stuff. Also, he wishes to share a trivia note about the series. Apparently, when it first aired in Poland on TV4, it was at 11 a.m. as part of the program block for children, because, well, it was a cartoon, so clearly it had to be meant for kids. What followed was a fine by the Polish National Broadcasting Council, and the show was then moved to a more appropriate time slot at night. Bashtan, for providing us with these materials and info, I proudly, yet angrily, present you with this channel's new highest honor, the Trivial Medal of Trivia. Anyway, the first movie thankfully seems to be the last time that Zginacz was used. When the show came to TV, they stuck with Bender as a name in the Lecter version, and the previously mentioned dub used Bender from start to finish. So that's it, I guess. The only other instances of this weird name being used that I could find online came from online sources that suggest that once or twice Bender's second name wasn't Bending, but rather Zginacz. Bender Zginacz Rodriguez. Oh. You know what, fuck it, I'll allow it. Let's just move on to a more quaint and less far out show, like yes, King of the Hill. The title references the game of the same name and works as a bit of wordplay since the main character is called Hank Hill. So, what do you do when adapting a show? Many countries, such as Germany, Italy, and Spain, kept it unchanged. Others, like Russia and the Ukraine, went for a more literal translation, while a country such as France decided to step up to the challenge and called it Le Roi du Texas, the Kings of Texas, which doesn't sound that off. Granted, it does seem to give more importance to Hank's Free Friends, but that doesn't seem like that big of a stretch given how prominent they are. But here comes Poland, sees this and goes, heh, cute, but how about this? Bobby contra Wapniaki. Bobby versus the Limestones. Now I should probably explain that limestone is a slang term for an older person, someone who's old-fashioned and doesn't get the modern age. But the more important question on everyone's mind should be, how on earth did Bobby Hill become the title character? Oh yeah, that opening, that title shot. Who do they think they could fool? For God's sake, if they said Wapniak singular, then maybe they could have insisted that the limestone in question is Hank Hill, but no, they went for plural, meaning general adults, so it does not work at the slightest. Ten chłopak nie ma racji. But perhaps some of you look at all this and just roll your eyes. Come on, every country at some point has a goof up while adapting something. Have you ever heard of the big green dub of Dragon Ball? They translated Piccolo as Big Green. How stupid is that? Ah yes, that's the AB group dub. They based their translation on the French one. Piccolo was a problematic character, as the French thought that the name would just make everyone think of a flute. And so they went with Satan Petit Cœur, which means Satan Small Heart, which sounds weird to me and many others, but I've seen French people online insist that this actually sounds good in their language. So, okay, fair enough. But the AB group saw this and knew they just couldn't translate it directly, so they went with Big Green, likely not even knowing what the original name was. Poland was in the exact same situation, and so that's how we got Szatan Serduszko. And you might be thinking, oh, so a direct translation of the French thing, right? No! Small heart would be Małe serce. Someone calling himself that would be odd, but not much else. Instead, they went with Serduszko, which is closer to little heart, tiny heart, itty bitty heart. So yeah, America saw Small Heart and in their clumsy way tried to find a better name. Poland, however, when faced with the same challenge, managed to make it worse. But you know what? I was never really that into Dragon Ball. Let's go to the world of Sailor Moon, a very important part of my childhood. So, Sailor Venus originally had an attack called Crescent Beam. However, in the Polish version it was called Groch Fasola, which means peas, beans. What? Why? What? Why would they call it like that? Well, it has been confirmed that the translator heard beam and misheard it as bean. Okay, I guess I can understand that. But how do you turn crescent into peas? Sailor Mercury also had a bit of a problem with her basic attack, which was called Szabon Spray, which is supposed to mean bubble spray. But instead, the Poles went with Mydło Powidło, The first word means soap, so okay, close enough I guess. But the second one means jam. Yes, soap and jam. What? Why those two things? They are not even alike. Well, in Poland, mydło powidło is actually an idiom which means to have everything on offer. Apparently the closest thing in English would be soup to nuts, although that one seems to describe a full course meal, whereas mydło powidło is used to describe a wide selection of products in a store from soap to jams. Apparently it even sometimes gets expanded with a third word at the start, with examples such as miód, śledź, szuwaks, and szydło. What is even going on? Those words don't even rhyme with mydło and powidło. I mean, the last one does, but whatever. Why is this the name of a bubble attack? Even on the base logical level, it's not mydło and powidło, it's literally just mydło. God, I must sound like a crazy person saying all this. What's even funnier in hindsight is that in Polish, powidło doesn't seem to be used as a word outside of this idiom. We practically always say powidła in plural. Also, at my household, we typically said dżem or konfitury. So young me didn't hear said word in either form that often, and that's why I didn't catch the connection. Sure, my mom did at one point tell me that mydło powidło was a saying, but didn't go further into detail, so my child brain thought that powidło was maybe like bath water or laundry water. Even dumber, I started to think that all the Sailor Scout powers had to be named after Polish sayings. Of course, that sounds stupid. I can't imagine an old granny on a farm saying błyskawice, grzmoty, ku pomocy, or potęgo ognia, działaj. But given how I was grasping at straws to find the logic in the usage of groch fasola, you can maybe see where I was coming from. And so I grew up, started attending high school, and one day our Polish teacher asked us for examples of idioms. Someone raised their hand and said soap and jam. Got praise for it. So obviously I had to follow that up with peas and beans, and was then told that I'm wrong, because that's not a real thing. I needed like a week to recover from the sheer embarrassment. But okay, time to wrap up. I want to say that I actually do respect the work of most translators. In fact, when I was younger, I wanted to become one myself. It's a hard job, and it must have been so much harder in the old days when the internet didn't exist the way it does now, making it harder to double-check things, compare stuff with translations from other countries in just seconds, and at the end of the day, it always remains a task to be done in a timely fashion, with a lot of subjectivity to it that a lot of people online might hate you for in the end. Not something that I envy. To be honest, I started making this video with the main intention to showcase the Polish translation of a specific scene in the Simpsons movie. In it, the family is late for church. Marge warns Homer about the people inside being able to hear him, to which he says,
"Relax, those pious morons are too busy talking to their phony baloney god."
And the Poles translated this to...
Plus na szelkach, Marcz, mohery to takie są kołtuny, że klapki na oczach i na uszach.
Which uses a lot of very Polish stuff, but what sticks out to me is mohery. A more brief way of saying moherowe berety, which means mohair berets. a slang term for old church-going grannies. It is often used to describe old people in Poland who are very religious. It is often tied with our political scene, as this demographic basically always votes for right-wing parties. There are also radio and TV stations in our country that people strongly associate with them. In a way, it is as Polish as you can get. But here we have Homer Simpson, the most American man in the world, just using that term in the middle of the sentence, despite the fact that to him, it should mean nothing. It just sounds so wrong to me. After all, this movie didn't get a 4Kids treatment. It still does take place in America. But, nonetheless, the translators decided to throw that very specific Polish term in there, which stuck out like a sore thumb to me. After leaving the theater, despite having enjoyed the movie as a whole, me and my brother did speak about how out of place that line was, using it as a prime example of how flawed the translation of the movie was. However, after remembering all the other examples I cited today, it doesn't seem as awful anymore. It is an insult directed at churchgoers. It would make sense to the Polish audience watching. It doesn't make sense for an American guy to say, but who cares? A majority of the audience, our father included, did get a good laugh from it. I would never have used it myself, but most people clearly got something out of it. Likely more than if it was just a direct translation, so who am I to talk? And I guess that'll be all for this general translation mistakes video. Originally I wanted to also cover the topic of movie titles, but that is such a huge rabbit hole that I decided to keep it as a separate video that I'll be working on next. I hope to see you all again when that comes out. Bye.